Greetings Exiles, I'm CodRayZeal, and joining me today as always are Sir Reginald Amadeus Fortescue III and Frank. Say hi guys.
Hi.
And today I'm just going to bring you the final state of my solo self-found Righteous Fire and Blade Vortex Chieftain, and just give you guys a bit of a guide on how this build functions and what kind of gear you can use to get it going. So starting off, my passive tree has remained pretty much the same as the last video, but just so that people can sort of one-stop shop in this video, I'm just going to go over it real quick, starting with the Ascendancy. Now, as mentioned before, I picked up Tawhoa. Now, the reason we pick up this is because it kind of serves the same function as a Calm's Way. So this kind of reduces our need for a Calm's Way, which allows us to run Righteous Fire quite a bit earlier. Next we pick up Ramako, which gives us a massive amount of fire resistance, ensuring that even curses can't reduce us below our capped fire resistance. And it also gives us a lot of life regeneration as well as some physical mitigation in the form of physical damage taken as fire damage. Next we picked up Ngamahu Flames Advance, which gives us a massive amount of physical damage converted to fire damage, as well as giving us a boost in our fire penetration and temporary boosts in damage, which will take effect usually at least once per boss. We then pick up Hinekora, which gives us some fire leech, some increased strength which boosts our life and damage slightly, and then we also get chance to cover rare or unique enemies in Ash, which increases the damage they take. The passive tree mostly is just standard Righteous Fire stuff. The one difference being we don't take Elemental Equilibrium because the Chieftain does not synergize well with Elemental Equilibrium. We do however take Avatar of Fire to convert the remaining 50% of our physical damage into fire damage. The full tree will be available in the path of building. And with that said, let's take a look at the gear that I ended up using in the end. Now the helm has remained the same, just a life armor resistances helm. And you could also use the Zoff helm, the Formless Inferno. This would give us a massive amount of armor because we have that extra 100% fire resistance, and this was part of the original plan. So that is an option there for much better physical mitigation. Next, my amulet is just a stats, life and resistances amulet. I wasn't able to find a marble amulet yet, so you know, it is what it is. For my ring, instead of using a +3 unset ring, which I wasn't able to craft, I'm using a red blade band, and instead of putting my purity of fire in here, I've put in my stone golem. The stone golem really doesn't die much when you put it in this ring, and this ring also has strength, life and increased fire damage, so it's not really a bad option. And it's definitely something to consider, especially if you need your stone golem up for your regeneration. Next we are still using a Calm's Way coral ring. And this is pretty much just to boost our regeneration per endurance charge, which we do have quite a few of, and this gives us an additional one. We're still using Maginord's Vice because this gives us a decent amount of life regeneration and quite a large amount of strength, which boosts our damage and our life. This would probably be better replaced with rare gloves, but I never found any that were a suitable replacement, so here they are. My boots are still the ones from the first video. I had a very hard time replacing these as I got very lucky to get them in the first place. And you just want standard life, movement speed, resists boots. If you're comfortable using Leap Slam to move around, you could also use Calm's Roots, but I didn't really feel this was necessary or justified. My belt is pretty insane, double life roll Elder Leather belt with quite a lot of resists and 1% increased movement speed. My chest is still a 6-linked Belly of the Beast, but this could also be a Calm's Heart in a bit of a different setup. Although this is what I found from the prophecy, so this is what I used. My weapon is a staff, a Shaper staff, which I rolled a bit with Chaos Orbs, and I settled on this roll because it has the Arcane Surge, which I'll explain in a bit, and it also has a bit of damage penetration, which as a Chieftain we kind of lack compared to something like an Elementalist or an Inquisitor. So let's go over the gems and links so that you can better understand my setup here. In our helm we have our Enduring Cry to get those endurance charges when we're not killing enemies. We also have our Purity of Fire in here. Since I only have a level 20, there was no reason to put it anywhere else or link it with anything, so there it is. And then we have Blood Magic linked to Clarity. This gives us a decent amount of mana regeneration for a very small portion of our life, so there it is. In our boots we have Herald of Ash linked with Anger and Enlighten, and then I've just put a Flame Dash in there for crossing gaps and whatnot. In our gloves we have Orb of Storms linked with Curse on Hit, Flammability and Chain, just to get that curse spread just quite a bit more. In our chest, in this particular setup, I've got my Scorching Ray linked with Castwall Channeling and Blade Vortex, and then Iron Will, Elemental Focus and Fire Penetration. In some setups you would have your Castwall Channeling in the staff, but since my staff supports Righteous Fire better, I've got the Righteous Fire in the staff and the Castwall Channeling set up in the chest. Now in the weapon, since I got supported by Arcane Surge, I decided to put my Righteous Fire in here because when Righteous Fire is supported by Arcane Surge, things like Swift Affliction and Less Duration work on it. So if I had a 6 link, I could do Righteous Fire linked with Elemental Focus, Burning Damage, Swift Affliction, Less Duration, and then increased Area of Effect or Concentrated Effect depending on the situation. So this is actually one of the highest DPS setups for Righteous Fire, especially if you don't have Essence of Horror money. So it's definitely worth considering if your build supports the regeneration with the staff. Although there really is very little reason to do this if you're still using a weapon and shield setup. Next, just going over my flasks real quick. I'm using a Saturated Eternal Life Flask of Staunching to remove bleeds and also heal a substantial amount of life over time. I found this to be more convenient than using an instant flask since I have so much life. Next I've found a Wise Oak. I did have a plan for getting this if I couldn't get it this way, which was to grab a bunch of divination cards that returned a flask and then use it on a level 8 character, followed by an Ancient Orb to flip it into a Wise Oak. But I never had to do that since I found this flask while trying to get the cards. Next I'm using a Chemist's Sulphur Flask of Warding. This gives us maximum uses and makes us immune to curses, as well as giving us some extra regeneration with the Consecrated Ground and some extra damage. Then, since I have no real movement skill, I'm using a Quicksilver Flask of Adrenaline just so that I can move around at a decent pace. And lastly, I'm using a Granite Flask of Heat with freeze immunity, just to sort of protect from chilled ground and random chills and stuff. Since there was a lot of cold damage and chilled ground and stuff going on in this league, I decided freeze and chill immunity was a decent thing to have. With all that said, I'd just like to go over a few other weapon options. So the staff was my original plan. With the Shaper staff, you can get Arcane Surge, making it perfect to link your Righteous Fire in. You can also get Cast While Channeling, giving you an extra link on your Cast While Channeling setup. There's also a lot of interesting things like Elemental Penetration, additional endurance charges, attack speed and a chance to deal double damage. There's just so many nice things you can get on an Elder Staff for this build that I think this is probably the best option, both in terms of cost and power. The most powerful setup is to use 2 stat sticks, as people call them, preferably with Elemental Penetration. These being Scepters, Shaper Scepters with things like adding additional damage, additional physical damage as fire, or extra elemental penetration. There's all sorts of juicy things you can get on Scepters. That said, a Shaper Mace is also a nice idea because it gives us a little explosion similar to Infernal Blow. And I have been using a mace for a while, and it is actually pretty nice for map clearing, especially when there's chaos like breaches and harbingers and all the stuff together. The explosions really start to add up and sort of do massive area clearing situations. An honorable mention for the weapons is to use the Signal Fire Quiver with a 6-linked short bow crafted with an Essence of Hysteria. Now, the reason this is a nice option is because the 6-linked short bow can be found pretty easily with the divination cards, and then the Essence of Hysteria should hopefully eventually get found. Alternatively, you can use an Essence of Woe to just get some spell damage on there. But this would convert all of your damage to fire without Avatar of Fire, allowing you to use extra conversion setups and also things like Atsuri's Promise. So it's definitely a one for the books. The last weapon setup is a stat stick and a shield. The shield probably being Rise of the Phoenix, Springleaf, or Sapphire's Frame. This probably has the least offensive capabilities but the highest defensive capabilities. The happy middle for me was the staff setup, and this is likely the best way to do this specific build. Other Righteous Fire builds that don't have all the added fire and conversion and stuff would probably benefit more from a different setup, but if you were not playing solo self-found and had access to Leo, you could also put some damage over time reduction on the staff. So I will include a version of the build with Path of Building that includes a perfect staff as I see it, and from there you can draw your own assumptions. But the whole point of this build was that it be adaptable to whatever I find, and as far as adaptability goes, I think this build is really up there. You can basically focus on the Blade Vortex cast while channeling portion, you can focus on the Righteous Fire, and you can focus on a very different set of weapons depending on what you find while you're leveling up. And since the passive tree remains basically the same without depending on your weapon setups, it's good to note that you won't need a lot of regrets in solo self-found when you change your weapons. I may start with this build in Incursion, or I'll start with the Ascendant with the shocking things, since there's some cool items and changes coming that I think would really benefit that build. So closer to the time I'll let you guys know which build I plan on starting, but for now this has been my Righteous Fire cast while channeling Blade Vortex Chieftain, and it was wonderful to play. I enjoyed solo self-found, and never once did I feel like I was desperately looking for an item. My stuff always just worked as it was. I enjoyed the most, which you may see from the gameplay video, the dual wield setup with the mace that had the explosions on it. But since getting the staff, it was very exciting to try out a staff. I didn't get quite what I wanted on the staff, and I did not know that an Orb of Binding would reduce the sockets. So right now I sit with very little Jeweler's Orbs and no Fusing Orbs, so I'm not likely to continue this build anymore. If I do try out anything else, maybe you'll see a video on that, but it's unlikely. So with all that said, I hope you enjoyed this journey through solo self-found, and I sure did. So from myself, Sir Reginald Amadeus Fortescue III, and Frank, we'd like to say good luck and stay juicy, and we'll see you in Incursion for probably more Righteous Fire.